President White is not present. She actually reached out and asked that I start the meeting. She should be arriving at some point this evening. I will call to order the meeting of the May 11th. This is a board meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District to order. Are there any matters from the floor?
We would like to introduce a new staff member to the board.
All right. Come on up.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Managers, thank you for the opportunity to introduce to you our new communications coordinator, Sarah Bamani. She has been with us since May 1st, and she has been working hard creating new materials for our grant application for the 6 Mile Carpus Management Project, and also for the RV Park project. And she's been also doing some other outreach for us on our social media. So she's been hitting the ground running, and it's great to have her here. So Sarah, say a few words.
Yeah, so I guess a little bit about myself. I grew up here in Corcoran, graduated from Wayzata High School. I have an undergrad degree in writing from Northland College and a master's in sustainable food systems from Green Mountain College, both environmental liberal arts schools. After college, I did AmeriCorps Vista in Montana for 2 years, and then I spent the last 5 years in Vermont doing outreach and education with the food co-op in Burlington there. So happy to be home, happy to be here.
Welcome.
Glad to have you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Don't let her work you too hard.
Seeing no other matters from the floor, any additions or corrections to tonight's agenda? Then I'd like to move approval of the agenda.
Second.
On the consent agenda, we have the...
All in favor?
Yeah, you might want to try the Robert's rules for, the motions are made and seconded, and then we vote on it.
It's been a while since I've run this meeting. All in favor of the previous motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. On to the consent agenda. We have the minutes of the April 27th meeting. There's nothing on the check. There's not a check register. And resolution 17-031, Carver County Water Management Organization boundary change. Any additions, corrections, or motion for approval?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you. Board updates. I would like to move the President's report down to item 13. Actually, both of them down to item 13. And I do have one update in that the Minneapolis Park Board has scheduled another public meeting about the Hiawatha Golf Course. It's going to be scheduled next Thursday. Just saw it on my way in here, actually, and I plan on attending. That's the only update I have. Manager Miller?
I attended the CAC last night, and they had a really lively discussion about our words program, and we have pretty much rejected the staff's proposal and said they're going to make a recommendation with three options for us that they're going to develop with the staff. And it sounded like some pretty good ideas. They had some, like this every 5-year plan or 5-year awards. One of the people there, it was supposed to be youth awards. He said kids don't like to be called youths. You know, he says they're young people or young adults. But anyhow, he said 5 years is not a very good idea because they'll be in college by the time they did their work and they're ready for the award. So they came up with some idea about going out to the schools and making the awards so that the kids in the environmental club or whatever it is can put it on their resume for college. Because that seems to be a driving force for all that your interest in the environment and social consciousness and everything else. Opportunity to get in a good college. So they're gonna, they've put a lot of thought into it, and so they're gonna come with a recommendation, for that. And they also, they did not get a chance to discuss the comprehensive plan. How engaged are they, James? I was scared to ask, because I wasn't sure what the answer was, so.
I think they're quite engaged. They've received a series of presentations in parallel or in concert with the presentations
Okay.
that have been made to the board. And they've been getting, they received the distribution of volume 2 at the same time as the board, and will be receiving volume 1 at the same time as the board Monday next week. So I think they're quite engaged.
Okay, it sounds like they were interested in getting very deep into the weeds, so.
That's probably true.
And I think the volume 2, as you recall, is the more the technical manual, so there isn't maybe as much opportunity for CAC feedback.
Oh, ain't time to be involved.
But then the sub-watershed plans and the executive summary will be kind of, I think, a lot more.
But they were reading that, and all of them weren't through it yet, and stuff, so, they're taking their role pretty serious, so I just glad to hear that staff is supportive.
I think that's good. All of those comments that we're going to get from those will aggregate and sat
Good.
down and assembled the board comments, and we'll do a final pass before it goes out for distribution.
Good. Okay, that concludes my report.
Sounds good. Anybody else? All right, item 8.2, upcoming meetings and event schedules. We have policy planning meetings on the 25th, as well as a board meeting. And on June 8th, there's going to be the same policy and planning committee meeting and a board workshop.
I might
Mr.
also,
Erdahl.
Manager Seckelman, just also to highlight one of the things that's down at the bottom part there for the sponsored or hosted events also is the June 1st, a tour with the board and CAC together. So just, wasn't really a meeting, but it's another thing to kind of keep on the radar for your schedules coming up. I think we talked about that last meeting, and that was the first choice of the dates that were kind of options.
Okay, so there are no public hearings or presentations. We have no permits requiring a variance. Action item 1, or action item 11.1. Resolution 17-034, an authorization to grant temporary easement to the city of Minnetrista.
Good evening, managers. Tonight, staff is requesting authorization to execute a grant an easement to the city of Minnetrista for improvements to Halsted Drive. The city is planning to improve 2.5 miles of Halsted Drive, including laying bituminous surface, replacing culverts, and regrading to remove some steep areas on the roadway. To complete this work, the city is requesting temporary easements from private property owners both north and south of Halsted Drive. And that includes the district's parcels at 7701 and 8015 Halsted Drive, which is the 6 Mile Marsh Prairie Restoration. The easements will be in effect from June 1st, 2017 until November 30th of 2018, although the city expects substantial completion of the construction by the end of the construction season of 2017. The easement comprises 4 linear sections that are 1,150 square feet, 550 square feet, 1,200 square feet, and 9,800 square feet on the south side of Halsted Drive. The existing vegetation of the 3 westernmost easement areas contain low diversity road edge species, and through an additional agreement between the city and the district, they will seed the disturbed areas with 2 higher diversity seed mixes that were used on the prairie restoration itself. The city's work within the easternmost easement section that will remove 10 trees that will not be replaced by the city. Based on recent nearby land sales and typical rental rates, the city calculated a $400 offer to the district for the easement. However, in the interest of working cooperatively with the city, being accommodating of their work and also recognizing that these are all taxpayer dollars, district staff recommends that the $400 payment be declined. While the city will be constructing the improvements to Halsted Drive, the city has also offered to construct for the district a small parking area. And this parking area will accommodate vehicles when we have school groups and other outreach groups out to the prairie for educational purposes. The parking area will be in the city's right-of-way and just east of the access road to the district's property. So staff is requesting that the board authorize the district administrator tonight to grant the proposed easement to the city of Minnetrista for a temporary easement over the district property to complete improvements to Halsted Drive. I'll take any questions you might have.
Any questions? There's a motion, is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion?
Quick question. The image we're looking, is this the north-south section of the road?
This is looking east.
Looking
Then
east.
the barn is actually to your right in this image. That is
Okay.
the access road back to the barn right there in the front.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
How large will you mentioned a parking area?
It's to accommodate, Manager Shuckton, it's to accommodate 2 school buses,
Okay.
so several vehicles as well.
Any other questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item 11.2, Resolution 17-035, an authorization to execute a cooperative agreement with the City of Victoria for Wasserman West Park and natural resource improvement.
You gonna give us the brochure if we vote right, or?
I was instructed that it was for the next item.
It might be a little out of context.
She doesn't want you to be distracted while she's speaking.
So she knows how to manage a group.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've been before another board, haven't you?
Very recently.
Thank you, Manager Shackleton, managers. I'm here seeking approval of the cooperative agreement with the City of Victoria for the Wasserman West acquisition and park development project. And just a note in leading in that the cooperative agreement was heard by City Council just this last Monday, and they did unanimously approve the agreement. So as we look at what have sort of emerged as our principal strategies in the 6 Mile system, those being managing CARP system-wide, pursuing some strategic opportunities around the use of alum to control phosphorus loading, wetland restoration again system-wide, and then stormwater management on sort of a responsive basis with development. This sort of falls within the realm of the wetland restoration in terms of our implementation strategies. I think we're all quite familiar with the site now. The site is actually currently 2 parcels just west of Lake Wasserman, currently vacant. The total acreage here is about 33 acres, 20 of which are wetland and about 13 are upland. Again, located on Lake Wasserman, which has been identified as a priority water body for both the district and the City of Victoria in a memorandum of understanding. Wasserman is impaired for nutrients. Principal drivers are external loading, and this site being a particularly heavy load coming off this site in particular, as well as internal loading exacerbated by a really high carb concentration within Lake Wasserman. This site, leading up to this acquisition, the site was on the market, being marketed as 3 separate lots that would be developed as individual single-family lots. And we had identified an opportunity early on for the district to acquire these lots to achieve water quality benefit by treating the pond there, which is responsible for a lot of the phosphorus load, as well as performing some wetland restoration, and doing so in partnership with the city, who would be looking to the upland to develop as a public park, and linking the parkland through that newly restored wetland. So we've worked over the last several months to develop this concept plan with the city, reflecting that it is that shared priority, that the property is probably the last opportunity on Wasserman to develop this type of public access, and currently really the last opportunity in the city of Victoria, though the city of Victoria is expanding. The project as proposed would achieve about a 75 pound per year reduction in phosphorus, which represents about 7% of the total load and 15% of the load reduction required in the TMDL. And through the development of this cooperative agreement, we've identified a means to collaborate on planning around this park and wetland restoration, collaborate on the funding of the improvement, and then of course work together on implementation. So the transaction framework, and here I'm talking principally about the purchase agreement that we executed on February 23rd of 2017 with the seller. The district, to remind everyone, is purchasing the property for $875,000. We have the due diligence period open through May 16th, so we're sort of coming up on the end here. And then we'll be closing by June 16th. And the major contingency within that period leading up to May 16th was the need to execute a cooperative agreement with the city that developed a preliminary park concept design, established a financing structure for the cooperative agreement, and then also established easement terms for the easement that the district would retain over the wetland area on site. So I'm going to walk us through the major terms now of the cooperative agreement in front of you. The first sort of big piece of that cooperative agreement being the development of a park design. The concept design that you see here will sort of serve as the basis of the park design process. But once we've executed this cooperative agreement, the district would look to retain the consultant for the actual park design. The city and district would share equally in the costs of the park design, which we would estimate at this time to be between $100,000 and $150,000. The design itself both includes sort of the site layout and developing an operations and maintenance plan to ensure that the land is sort of being cared for once it's deeded over to the city. Would establish a phased construction plan to sort of establish a timeline for the investment in the improvements. And then would also establish a financing approach for the park improvements. The cooperative agreement in front of you establishes a clear split at this time between the city, who will assume all of the park improvement costs, and the district, who will assume all of the restoration costs. If once we have an actual plan in place, the district wants to assume some of those costs if they're related directly to mission around providing education or signage or something along those lines, we might sort of renegotiate at that time that split. And then we also are establishing that both parties will collaborate in identifying and retaining grant funds to help the process along. And then once the park design is approved by both parties, the city would be leading the actual park construction, the improvements on the park, and the district would lead the restoration approach. The other major point of the cooperative agreement is establishing financing terms. So the cooperative agreement, as outlined, establishes that the district and city will, within 60 days of execution, develop and execute a contract for deed that will have the city paying the district for the land over a 5-year contract term. The city acquisition price is $850,000, and sort of the payment structure is that at closing, the city will be paying the district half of that amount, $425,000. For the following 3 years, it'll pay a portion of what remains at $42,500, And then at year 5, it will be, it'll owe us, they will owe us $212,000, so the remainder of the balance. And the city would like to sort of pay us off faster if they can, so they reserve flexibility within here, but in looking at their own financing structure, they felt like this was the arrangement that they could most certainly sort of guarantee getting us money on time. The remedy for failure to perform, which means failure to pay, would be title retention. So under contract for deed, if there is a failure of payment, our only sort of remedy is to keep the land. And when the land does get deeded over to the city finally, the district will retain that wetland easement, and you have a draft of those easement terms within your packet.
Can you show on the plan here, what portion of the property would be subject to easement?
The easement, sure. So the full wetland area will be established in easement from the beginning. So this is a little piece of upland here, and then all the other area that's sort of colored green is mostly the upland area, so it's really the remainder that is wetland. So the pond itself is about 6 acres that's wetland, and then the rest is sort of shallow marsh wetland. So that would all have easement. And the way that the easement's drafted, some improvements can be made that would link the park area through the easement, like they can place a boardwalk in the easement. So the easement really becomes part of the actual park design.
Just a note, Anna, I think looking at the letter's intent, I think it's 5 years of payments, and that's also what's needed to make the numbers add up.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you. So the next steps, as I said, this has been executed, or this has been approved by the City of Victoria. So moving forward, if it's approved by the board, we'd be looking to close with the seller on June 16th. To meet our obligation to execute a contract for deed within 60 days, we'd be looking to have that in place by July 13th. And then our deadline for park design completion would be December 31st, at which time we would be establishing that schedule for park improvements as well as the restoration design improvements.
Any discussion? Manager Miller?
So it's a really an interesting project. I mean, it's quality here is just amazing. It's not a crappy little project like some of them. I used on
The form letter?
on invented term, but it's that we used to use. I think it's really significant that it's the first one we're doing out there, and it's really a highly visible and very impactful project, and the design is really exciting. So when this project is done, the city will own all the land, it will have the easement, and they'll have the maintenance responsibility.
Manager Miller, that's how it is currently in the cooperative agreement, that they'd have the maintenance on the upland. We would have maintenance obligations in the wetland area where we would have done the restoration.
Manager Olson?
Yeah, there was a lot of talk over the last 3 years with the city, in that the city was anticipating to build a lake park. They wanted a park on a lake someplace in the city. And the term lake park was this name that they kept using. And the band shell got built on Steiger, but we now have this great big lake in the middle of the city, and it is the center of the geographic area. So to have it there and to have them all look at this and seeing that it is fulfilling their intention for the last 3 years, it really came together nicely for everybody. So kudos to the whole group.
Yeah, I would like to take the opportunity to thank you, Manager Olson, for attending a lot of council meetings with us and meeting with residents, and really sort of helping bring the whole project together.
Thank you.
there any further discussion? Is there a,
Just out of curiosity, was there a lot of public comments at their hearing?
30 emails.
Oh.
The council said that they had received 30 emails in support. And we had a lot of Lake Association folks attending meetings and really tracking the project closely, so.
That's nice.
Yeah.
There's a lot different welcome than we did.
Yeah,
we
that
had,
doesn't,
you know, 5
oh,
or
every
6,
project.
10 years ago. So good, this is really good staff work that was done and good community relations work on behalf board by Bill Olson.
is there a motion to approve resolution 17-031?
So moved.
Manager Olson, is there a second?
Second.
Second Manager Miller, any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Ms. Brown. Thank you. On to item 11.3, resolution 17-036. Authorization to request funds from the South Sands Outdoor Heritage Council. Ms. Brown gets to stay there.
I think they know how to build
We did.
Okay. Thank you, President White. So we are here requesting authorization to request funds from the Lessard Sands Outdoor Heritage Council. At this meeting, you have in your packet a draft application, so we will be looking to complete the application over the next 2 weeks, and we'll bring it back on the 25th for final authorization to release that. So I'm going to sort of walk us through a little bit of an overview of little background on 6 Mile and sort of how this fits in with the overall strategy, and then turn it over to Eric Fieldseth to talk us through sort of our grant application approach. And Lars just handed out a handout that our new employee, Sarah Bamani, helped us pull together over the last really week. We've kind of put her on a tight timeline to help piece through a lot of information, so we appreciate her help there. So we're all quite familiar with the 6 Mile system now. Looking across the 6 Mile, we have come to really understand what some of the major issues are that we're facing and sort of the challenges to developing an implementation strategy on this scale. To just do a quick refresher on some of the major system drivers here, one of the principal ones being the CARP management, and we've recently had a lot of education about the whole framework of CARP within the system and the challenges that they create in restoring shallow lake ecology. Another major driver out here, one that we just discussed, are the altered wetland systems. Degraded wetlands are responsible for most of the external load to lakes and present their own challenges in addressing them. Another major issue out here is runoff. Stormwater runoff is largely managed through regulation at this point, but we are looking for opportunities to, as development occurs on the landscape, do something more, take a regional approach to achieve additional benefit as we manage stormwater runoff. So we've taken these issues and developed sort of a clean implementation strategy, principally being CARP management. CARP management is a precursor to a lot of the other work that we need to get done out here. And we'll also take a concerted and multi-year implementation effort to really start to see a reduction in that CARP population. We'll be talking later tonight about the strategy around alum dosing and the potential to site a facility to see more short-term benefit in Halstead Bay. Wetland restoration over the coming months, will be developing a programmatic approach to identifying wetland restoration priorities across the watershed. And then I already talked about stormwater management. So at our April 13th meeting, I believe it was, we discussed at length the strategy around seeking external funds to help support this implementation program. and discussed one of the shorter term strategies being applying for Lassard Sam's funds. So we are coming up on an end of May deadline to prepare and submit an application to Lassard Sam's. Within this application, we're looking to not only meet sort of the short-term need of managing carp, but also start to develop sort of a marketing strategy around the broader 6 Mile implementation program. So we're starting to get on the radar of some of these larger funding pools, the overall strategy of how we want to protect and improve the 6 Mile system. For this grant ask in particular, we're looking to request between $1 and $1.5 million for carp management over a 3 to 4 year time frame. We've developed a pretty aggressive implementation schedule to really try to get as much of the work done as we can within that short time frame that Eric will elaborate on. And then as we're sort of preparing this application and going through the process, we'll also be developing a more of that landscape restoration acquisition plan that can then be applied for LCCMR funding coming up here in December. So as we have prepared our application and started to think about how this program gets marketed to the Lassard Sam's Council, one of the big tasks and big strategies has been to identify amongst our existing partners how they can support this process, and then start to expand and build new partnerships that can also support our implementation framework. So we have received a lot of support from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they will be helping to review the application as well. We've met with Carver County Soil and Water Conservation District, who also have some smaller funding opportunities and a good perspective on how to seek funds in more rural landscapes. We will be receiving support from the 6 Mile Halsted Basin Watershed Partnership. We'll be developing a letter for them to submit with the grant application. And then we're also working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to connect us with some new nonprofit partners who we haven't had as much contact with. For this grant in particular, we'll be looking to reach out to the Minnesota Waterfowl Association and Ducks Unlimited. We also met earlier this week with the Department of Natural Resources to get an understanding of how the application would fit in sort of a regulatory framework, whether we would face any hurdles in implementing the scale of a project in 3 years. None were identified in particular, but it was a good opportunity to get it on their radar and have them be aware of some of the asks that we'll be having over the coming years. So again, we'll be applying for this grant the application deadline is May 31st. We would, if we were invited to then present, that would occur in August, and we would know whether we were receiving funding at the end of September. Funds become available July 1st, and it's a 3-year implementation timeline with the opportunity to extend. So I'm going to now turn it over to Eric to kind of run through the application that we have prepared and are preparing.
Thanks. So I'll walk through kind of our application strategy and approach and the work plan within the application. So after talking kind of with some of the partners like U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and others, and as well as looking through other Lassard Sam's grants that have been awarded, kind of found some key things that make an application more successful. When comparing kind of our phase 1 approach here, certainly it's innovative. Just the sheer scale of carp management that we're looking at has never been done before in this big of a system, 15 lakes. Usually they've been smaller systems, and they've been kind of not necessarily grouped with other strategies. So we got a bigger restoration strategy. It definitely, the U of M's done a lot of science on what to expect from carp management, so we know what those measurable results are. We'll be able to measure those. We have this regional partnership that's definitely unique to this system. And like I mentioned, the programmatic approach, it's more than just cart management. We have kind of next steps beyond that. So we have a lot of the kind of the things that would make our application attractive. So the application itself is going to be very much focused on kind of the habitat improvement for fish and waterfowl. It really fits in well with what Lassard Sam's is looking for. In addition to that, we know there's going to be secondary water quality benefits that we're really interested in with carp management. So we know that, managing carp is going to kind of reduce the turbidity that they cause, increase water clarity, increase the aquatic vegetation, which will help root the sediment and stabilize the sediment, absorb some of those nutrients. And then it's kind of what, a prerequisite to other strategies such as in-lake alum treatments to address internal loading. In the Lassard Sam's call for funding proposal, they have kind of the state broken out into ecological sections. So we're in the metro urbanizing area, and they have a list of kind of priority actions that they're looking for in those areas. And we kind of meet two of those areas. One is kind of restoration of littoral habitat. Littoral habitat in the lake is really the area where aquatic plants grow, kind of defined as 0 to 15 feet. And then protection, long-term protection from invasive species. So we can talk a little more about that on this next slide. When you look at kind of the predicted outcomes we're looking at from this project, restoration of that littoral habitat in 10 lakes, which is a little over 1,200 acres, improved habitat for fish and waterfowl. We expect to see improvements in a lot of the fish that people like to fish for, panfish, bass, pike, those types of things, as well as increased waterfowl use. Additionally, it's kind of protecting littoral habitat in another 4 lakes, which is almost 400 acres. So these lakes have not as abundant carp populations right now, but obviously we know that as recruitment occurs across the subwatershed, the population is going to increase, so that's more protection. And then through the kind of the U of M's approach, integrated approach, we'll have sustainable kind of long-term protection from carp across the whole system.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
I've always thought of 6 Mile as being kind of a string of shallow lakes. And, if the littoral zone is defined as 0 to 15 feet, do they get much deeper than that?
Yeah, Manager Shackleton manages. It's a mix of shallow and deeper lakes. Some of our deeper lakes almost act like shallow lakes, but Wasserman, has its max depth is 30 to 40 feet. Auburn's are fairly deep as well. Parley's a shallow lake. Lunston's a shallow lake. Halstead Bay is obviously 30 to 40 feet, so it's a mixture.
Okay, thank you.
Another quick one. As you go through this, how do we communicate to the decision makers that we've done this University of Minnesota study, so we really know where we're at? Is that featured?
Yes, that has to be in the grant application as kind of the approach that we're taking. We've been through 3 years, spent $500,000 on this big U of M assessment. It's really kind of positioning that as kind of already some in-kind or matching funds we've already expended.
Great, thanks.
Madam Chair, in addition to showing the plan in the application or with the application, most successful applicants meet with key members and go over these particular issues. And I suggest we make sure we schedule that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Manager Becker. So I guess kind of moving on into more of the actual work plan itself. So here's a map of 6 Mile with some of the management units drawn and some of the activities. Kind of the first objective activities we're looking at are suppressing the carp recruitment. That's cutting off, the source of new carp to the system. We've identified, 6 or 7 water bodies that provide new carp. So looking at winter aeration in 6 of those water bodies and barriers in a couple other areas. So aerating Marsh Lake, Turbid Lake, Sunny Lake, North and South Bunsen, and Mud Lake. And then installing a barrier, which is actually going to be more of a permeable berm at the outlet of Crown College Pond, which feeds to Parley Lake. This berm will require less maintenance than other physical barriers. It'll be more natural looking, as well as has the added benefit, after discussing with engineers, of additional kind of water flood storage to the system. And then replacing a current barrier at the outlet of Zumber Lake to Sunny Lake, just kind of reinforcing that, making it a little bigger. It's kind of prone to overtopping and flooding conditions. Additionally, we're looking to install a barrier between Mud Lake and Halstead Bay. This really cuts off kind of the fish in Greater Lake Minnetonka. So we know fish in Halstead Bay, Mud, and Parley are all kind of one population that mix frequently. We also know carp from Halstead Bay move into Greater Lake Minnetonka as well. So cutting that off will kind of contain those populations. We can also put in kind of a trap in that area, so we can additionally trap fish as they move through that area. So it's kind of two benefits. And then finally, kind of removal of adult biomass, which would be through kind of a few different activities. Just think of them as kind of tools in the toolbox that we can utilize. There's winter seining, open water seining, which is all through commercial fishermen. Box net trapping, which is smaller rectangular nets that you can set during open water and remove smaller numbers of carp. It's very cost effective. And then stream trapping in kind of those migratory areas as carp move. So those are kind of the three big strategies we'll be looking at to remove carp.
I feel like I should know the answer to this question. What would a barrier be? Like, is it a chain link fence type thing, or?
Barrier can look a lot of different ways. A lot of times they're just almost like grates, or depends on where you're putting it really. You design it for that system, so like we'll work with our engineers on choosing the appropriate kind of design based on how much water flow and the size and what work best. But they look a lot of different ways. So.
Okay. I was just envisioning different flows in different places, thinking,
yeah.
You know, the one between Zumbra and Sunny would be very different from
right. That's more of a fence than anything.
Okay.
Yeah. There. Yeah.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Amanda Becker.
while we're at a short break, the fish removal, the carp removal, will that be in Mud Lake primarily? Or
No.
Halstead Bay too?
Yep. So we'll be looking to remove fish. So if you look at the map, the darker blue are all the water bodies that need some level of removal based off the U of M's populations assessment data. But it doesn't necessarily mean fish in those water bodies will be removed in that water body. So for instance, Mud Lake and Parley Lake, we know that all the fish in Mud Lake overwinter in Parley. So the strategy there will be to remove fish in the winter in Parley Lake. You'll be getting fish from mud. Additionally, you could remove fish at the barrier trap between Mud and Halsteads that move between Parley and Halstead. So it's kind of a suite of methods there to remove fish.
Madam Chair, in the spring.
Spring and spring as they go to their spawning grounds, and then usually later in the summer, early fall when they try to return to their water body. There's also a fair amount of movement through the year between Mud and Halsteads, beyond just those two kind of time periods.
Thank you.
So in addition to the active removal and implementation, there'd be a monitoring portion. And the goal here is to track our progress on removal, identify, recruitment if it happens. This will be really long-term monitoring that's going to be required. So it'll be monitoring in those kind of 6 water bodies. If aeration were to fail, we need to know if carp are able to recruit. That can mean putting us way back all the work we've been doing, as well as kind of understanding and documenting the ecological response in the lake. The water quality improvements, the aquatic plant community improvements. So to do that, be looking to do kind of annual carp population surveys in the lakes as removal occurs. That's done through electrofishing. The U of M has identified a method to identify kind of carp populations through electrofishing. Use of trap nets looking for recruitment. There's a couple photos up there of trap nets. Those are used to sample those juvenile smaller carp. And then the effectiveness monitoring, which we'll be doing through water quality monitoring, as well as aquatic plant surveys, looking at the aquatic plant response. So getting kind of into the timeline and budget, year one is going to be a lot of kind of implementation of barriers and aeration units, as well as some removal. And then year 2 and 3 are more operations of those units and barriers, more biomass removal of carp, continued effectiveness monitoring. So I got kind of a budget table we can kind of walk through here. So the suppressing carp recruitment, you'll see, 141,000 budgeted for kind of year 1, 2018. So keep in mind these are 2018 and 2021 are kind of half years. So funds are available July 1 of 18. Kind of have to spend them by end of June 2021 unless you're able to get an extension. So a lot of that initial cost is going to be running electric for aeration units, buying the aeration units themselves, installing the kind of barrier berm we were talking about at Crown College Pond, installing a weir and temporary barrier between North and South Blunston, as well as a stilling well. That will allow us to manipulate water levels in South Blunston as needed. That will help reduce, it's another good strategy to reduce carp recruitment, or if carp recruitment occurs, it's a way to manage carp in that area. South Blunston is kind of the key water body that we need to focus on, produces the most carp. And then replacing that barrier at the summer outlet. So all those funds are expected kind of in that first couple quarters once we get those funds in 2018. Some things could be pushed into 2019 based on permitting, to work through that a little further. The barriers and traps, again, that's 75,000 for the barrier between Mud and Halstead's Bay. So that would be, we look to get that in right away. You can see biomass removal would kind of continue throughout the duration of the project. A little higher in 2018, that also includes installing a weir at the Wasserman outlet that we can additionally have slots to put in temporary barrier. We currently have a temporary barrier in place. It's a little more makeshift. This is a much more fail-safe type barrier, much more reliable. And again, that removal is going to include the barrier, box net trapping, winter aeration, which is a pretty significant chunk of that money, as well as the ability to trap carp in the stream channels. The equipment and operations, you'll see 92,000 initially, right away in 2018. That's to kind of get us geared up to do a lot of the monitoring that's needed. It includes buying the trap nets, electrofishing boat, barrier supplies, and maintenance for all that. There's permits and signage needed when you aerate water bodies. So we have to have thin ice signs. A lot of safety measures that go into aerating water bodies in the winter. And just operational costs for aeration units, so paying for the electric while those are operating. There's a line item for kind of contingency rapid response. This is as we monitor if carp recruitment occurs, aeration fails, or some other event happens, we would need to respond to that event and control those juvenile carp before they grow into adults and move into other lakes. Monitoring, since we'd be purchasing a lot of this equipment, there really is little cost to monitoring. Staff would have the resources available to do that. That $28,000 is implanting radio tapes to track carp. We'd have to use consultants. There's a little more expertise and equipment that we just don't have that we'd have to utilize to help with that kind of, it's a surgical procedure and there's some methods you have to follow for that. And then in the grant application right now, we have including an additional kind of technician position for that 3 years to help actually accomplish all of this work. It's a very large scale project, and we can talk more about that in the next few slides here. One thing we'll be continuing to do is work through our partners, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, kind of examining what level of overhead is appropriate in these grant applications to make them most competitive, because we don't want to submit something that's just not going to be competitive. So these are things, staffing and equipment are two things we have to kind of weigh. And we'll talk a little more about that a little later. So I'll pass it back to Anna.
Yep, so that's sort of the overview of what we're planning to do and what we're applying for. In order to meet that May 31st deadline, we're looking to quickly finalize that application. The one in your packet was still sort of our first draft, and we'll have a lot of work over the next couple weeks to finalize that and route it for review, and I think we'll be really getting a lot of support and review from the Fish and Wildlife Service. We'll continue to establish those partnerships and build support around the application and secure letters, secure review. And one thing that we've sort of teed up the 6 Mile Halstead Bay Watershed Partnership to do is not only supply the letter of support, but if we do, if we are invited to present an interview, we'd be asking some of the city policymakers to make phone calls on our behalf as well. And then would also be looking to get a letter of support from the University of Minnesota AIS Research Center. And then, as Eric alluded to, there are some pending decisions over the next 2 weeks related to managing the amount of overhead in the application. One thing that we've heard in just sort of networking and gathering information here is that applications are favored that are more implementation focused versus overhead friendly or overhead heavy. In this case, you know, there is equipment that has to be bought. There are staffing considerations that have to be made. So we're just trying to sort of strike the right balance in the application as to, you know, what percentage that the overhead actually ends up constituting in the application. And I'll let Eric provide a little bit more information about those equipment and staff time considerations.
So kind of start with the equipment. I have another little table here just showing some of the equipment we'd be looking to purchase, and the alternative to that is kind of using consultants. You can see from the table, just, I mean, it's obvious we have to just, it makes most sense for staff just for the district to purchase the equipment. You know, not only can we utilize it for this project, we can utilize it in other areas of the watershed for carp assessments and management. You know, electrofishing and trap net surveys, the trap net gear rather. So that cost for equipment is already in that first application budget that I showed you. The alternative for using consultants for that is significantly more. These are both require a high amount of staff time. Box net trapping right now in that budget, application budget I showed you, is consultants doing that work. It's labor intensive, but looking into this further, we found out the equipment's actually really cheap to buy, like $1,500. Like I mentioned, this is labor intensive work. So the alternative would be for us to buy the equipment and utilize staff to do that work, which would reduce, you know, the overhead and the grant ask fairly significantly. Again, that's high staff time. Stream trapping, so these costs for stream trapping aren't currently in the budget. Received some kind of further feedback from the U of M. It's been kind of reviewing our management plan and working with us. They recommend if we're going to do stream trapping, we should have a backpack electroshocker to aid in removing fish once you trap them. Otherwise, it's really difficult. So that's just a cost that they've identified that we should really be thinking about. That's not currently in there, but would have to be.
Can we have 8 of them, man?
I don't have children, so I'm not sure.
And then,
Yeah, I don't know.
the aquatic plant service and carp tracking, there are already things we do, capable of doing. That'd be kind of in-kind work, and I just kind of showed basically the alternative costs using consultants on that. So, you know, we need equipment, and it's just a matter of, you know, working through, identifying, is it, you know, is it worthwhile? Is it appropriate to put in the grant application? Will it make us less competitive? those are the questions we have to work through and bring back to the 25th.
Manager Olson?
In spite of the overhead definition, do you have an idea as to how many available tons of biomass could be removed?
It's a lot. I don't know the number.
It would be, we kind of roughly do. If we
It's
know.
in the report. It's in the U of M.
Right, so if we look at how many kilograms per hectare those lakes have, we can actually come up with a number. It would be a great number to know if you're talking, because what I would do if I were a decision maker is I'd say, okay, take that number and we're gonna put that, we're gonna put the tonnage on top and we're gonna divide it by this.
Sure.
To see how many tons per buck we can get.
Right.
And if it comes out reasonable, suddenly it doesn't look so expensive. What we don't want to do is say, we're going, fishing for marlin and not get a marlin. That's,
We won't get a marlin.
That's really invasive.
Never say
That
never.
was very invasive.
so and I've seen a lot of equipment go out after marlin.
And a lot of money, yeah.
But if we could just, give them a feel, just say, in these 10 lakes, there's a biomass of 30,000 tons, whatever that number is. It is a way of looking at it.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
What, you know,
Dollars per ton.
is that number somewhat reasonable? Or what is the number? I think it'd be.
Yeah, I'd have to go back to the U of M report and look at those numbers. I should have the current management plan. I mean, it varies by water bodies. There's 30,000 some pounds of Wasserman. I mean, you're looking at 60 to 70,000 pounds in Halstead, everywhere in between there, in Auburns and so on. I mean, you add it up on 13 lakes, it's
A couple
significant.
100,000 pounds.
And I've seen a table where you say how much we have to remove to get down to that 100.
Right, so each kind of management unit in the lake will kind of have management goals to decrease how many carp we need to get rid of to meet kind of that identified threshold where they're not providing that ecological damage.
It's a strong statement when you say, in a perfect world, we're going to remove so many tons or truckloads or whatever, and that'll get us to the sustainable level.
Manager Miller?
Like many of us at the table, we've written grants for various things, and the real trick is, get the grant, but the real trick is not to add to your costs, is to relieve some of your costs. So a good grantsman can usually has an objective is to hide his salary in the grant application. I'm not suggesting you do that, but I'm suggesting that we try to figure out people we currently have that could be assigned to this project, and rather than be an additional budget item, it could be relieving our ad valorem.
Madam Chair, and that counts as match, which is an important criteria.
The temptation is to find, hire more people and all that kind of stuff, but the real clever part is to figure out how to cover your existing costs associated with the kind of project.
Yep. So that's a good kind of segue into kind of the staffing discussion. So taking a step back even, I guess, to the strategic planning process, the new kind of priorities for the AIS program were, management of high impact AIS in a prioritized fashion, such as common carp and 6 mile, Halstead watershed, early detection and rapid response, early promoting research in the watershed, and then supporting our partners' prevention efforts for AIS. Adding on this project to our existing task is, pretty significant additional workload. It's a very labor-intensive project and in an aggressive timeline, but some pretty amazing outcomes. We did kind of a time allocation of the work plan, estimating kind of its equivalent to, 1.5 FTE for staff. We currently have 2 FTE in the department. And then I kind of just listed out here some of the other ongoing activities that we're involved in. So if you recall, earlier this year we were involved in or approved our involvement in the Long Lake Carp Assessment proposal to Hennepin County. Our participation in that with the 3 cities out there is staff time helping to do trap net surveys. That was kind of our contribution, reduced the grant ask pretty significantly. The district recently developed the E-grade monitoring program in 2018. We'd be looking at the next set of some watersheds. Our AS staff has been leading the biological monitoring for the district. So through E-grade, that'd be aquatic plant surveys, score the shore assessments, looking at the shoreline, as well as assisting with kind of wetland surveys. As well as, so we also have our early detection and rapid response program. Had a pretty extensive early detection program. So we're out there really pretty heavily intensive looking for new AIS. It's led to the discovery of zebra mussels in Christmas Lake and Minnewaska. And then we've engaged in rapid responses in those situations that have been pretty staff time extensive. We could use consultants, but in both those instances we had a fair amount of staff time as those came up. Had the Z-mussel, Minnetonka Z-mussel study ongoing. We're pretty far into that. We're now, a lot of that work is behind us. We're continuing just to monitor the population, which is really not an extensive time commitment. It's kind of putting the sample plates out in the spring, checking them at the end of the year, and really it's documenting those water quality changes in Minnetonka that we're observing and linking it to zebra mussels. There's also work we're doing just across the R&M department, helping with diagnostic monitoring, other water quality monitoring, and then administering the kind of the AS prevention cost share funding that we've had ongoing. So looking at kind of that workload, existing staff, there's really kind of a couple options to go about looking at doing all this. So we could budget for the technician and the grant. It's $144,000 over those 3 years. It is 12% of the total grant budget, which is not insignificant. It would increase project overhead, but not as much as the consultant cost would be. And it would allow us to accomplish those other activities, not impacting kind of our current workload. Another alternative would be just to utilize our existing R&M staff as kind of on an as-needed basis. But we'd have to look at possibly reducing some of our AS workload. So I kind of developed a little bit of a prioritization list based off of the strategic planning process. So certainly 6 Mile Carp and Long Lake Carp, if that grant were to be funded, it would be certainly a prioritized work. E-grade monitoring, we're lucky to be in a subwatershed that has not as many lakes, so it's less work for us. That can be spaced over 3 years. We can still accomplish that. The biggest impact would probably be early detection and rapid response work. We may not be able to provide the same level of early detection monitoring that we have. We may not be able to provide as much staff response in a rapid response event. We may have to rely on partners to do that kind of work, or consultants if we wanted to engage in that. The Z-mussel study, like I mentioned, I think we could still handle that. But we'd be less available, obviously, with other departmental tasks, like diagnostic monitoring and things like that. So these are things we'll continue to kind of look at, talk with our partners on, as far as looking at overhead in general, equipment, staffing, and come back on the 25th with a little more clarity on that.
Manager Miller?
This is really good work, and this should be commended for developing this program that you have so fast from the university study. But this is kind of frustrating because we're looking at this as a silo, you know, you get the AIS versus research and monitoring and all that. Can't we just look at the whole area and find out if there's people that aren't fully utilized or not fully utilized all year, or some other way of doing it, so that, you know, we can use the resources we currently have rather than, you know, several people on the staff now are hired as temporary to manage a crisis, and all of a sudden the crisis is gone and the people are still here. They're good people, but I just don't want to, because these grants can be two-edged swords. You end up with much more overhead at the end of the project than you had when you started it, and you don't have the assistance any longer. So I'd like to see you come back with a proposal that doesn't add any people and using existing people, even if they're in different groups or whatever.
Absolutely.
Because we've got to figure out how to do more with what we've got, and maybe do less things than we're currently doing, but do more things with the same people.
Thank you, Manager Shepherd.
We might be on the same page. I was about to just ask about, or bring up the HR plan update that was supposed to be coming in the next month or so. And I would think this could fall into that. But
I was going to refer to that a little bit in my administrator's report. So I was thinking not directly related to that, but somewhat to that, is that Manager Miller, you're suggesting to kind of look at including some staff costs into the grant application. One of the things that I think both with Lassard SAMS and the LCCMR grant is that they have kind of this catchphrase to supplement and not supplant. So they have some restrictions against funding ongoing operations, but it might be a way for us to leverage those resources for a specified period of time to gain additional capacity to do something. So I think we need to kind of figure out how that balance works best.
Right, you don't say we're covering this cost with your funds. You know, it's a little more creative than that, but.
Well, there's these grant funds have quite significant reporting requirements too. So I think that if, but I understand totally what you're saying. If we can kind of cover some of those kind of organizational expenses as part of that, certainly the University of Minnesota has very high, you know, overhead costs into everything that they do. But we can, and maybe Manager Becker has a little bit more of a insight on that too.
Well, and again, if we pay for it, we can list it as match.
If it's part of our budget,
right? So that makes good sense. And option 2, from my point of view, is the preferred option. They do want to supplement and not supplant. They expect us to come to the project fully capable of administering the project and pulling it off, and they'll pay for the capital and those sorts of things.
Thank you. I'll turn it back to staff.
Okay, just in conclusion, I think we have a really compelling grant ask here. We have put together a really programmatic approach to CART management, and we're looking to, put it in a framework that we think will really resonate with the Lassard SAMS Outdoor Heritage Council. We continue to look to our partners to grow support on this project and to help us make sure that the final project is really refined and fits within the framework. I think by applying for these funds now at sort of the early stage as we kind of shift into implementation, it gives in 6 Mile, it gives us a really sort of accelerated jump start on a lot of the other activities. I think sort of the concept of this massive concentration of carp in 6 Mile that potentially, get in the way of some other management activities has been a little daunting, and this sort of gives us a really great jump start on some of those management activities. This approach really does align with the shifting strategic direction of the AIS program. It will bring both Eric and Jill working really directly with planning to help leverage the expertise that they have to sort of shift to more of an implementation focus. And again, we'll, with that, bring the final application back on May 25th for final release. So we're just looking now for sort of reaction to that framework that we've presented, whether there are questions or things missing in that ask as we prepare for this deadline of the 31st.
Thank you. Manager Wilson?
I agree with what Manager Miller said, that this is an outstanding effort on your part. Would it be possible to take everything we've done in kind, like the $575,000 from the university study, and put it on a single sheet where they see the money we're asking from them, and they see what we've already put in?
Manager Olson, I think that is part of the application where we'll, as we outline budget, I think there is an opportunity to put in.
Okay, 'cause if I were making a decision and I could see $1,000,002, 980, you know, it gets that sharing burden obligation out in the open, and that'd be a great thing to have on.
And some of those numbers are in the packet, page 51, source and amount of non-OHF money spent for this work in the past.
Are you talking about your few key graphics in the
Right,
front?
but what I'm saying is,
Present it in a different way.
on a single table, what we're asking for and what we've already done. They can see it right there. You shouldn't have to hunt for it, is my comment.
Any other questions? The action item is to approve Resolution 17036, authorization to request funds from Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council. Can I have a motion on that?
Move approval.
Well, it was a tie. Manager Olson moved, Manager Miller seconded. Are there any other questions before we vote? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much. Mr. Whisker.
I just wanted to address the staffing piece, just to kind of put a finer point on it. I think Anna finished up at the end addressing Manager Miller's comment regarding the silos, and that we are pulling people across department lines. So we're mobilizing resources from research and monitoring to be much more implementation focused. And Eric and Jill, so I think we're already starting to address the silos, and we're pulling people from across the organization whose skill sets match the workload that we're setting out to undertake. I think just for food for thought for this evening, as we continue to embark on pulling in outside funds, the fact of the matter is, when we ask for more resources, when we ask for $2 million or $5 million from LCCMR and Lessard-Sams next time, I've had this conversation, I think, with Manager Becker as we were preparing the application. We opted to not include acquisition dollars and restoration dollars because we don't have the capacity. So it is something the board needs to consider, that as we scale up the effort of implementation, and you say, okay, we can't levy everything, we're going to pull in outside financial resources, you will need to consider how to staff the implementation of those dollars. We can only do so much, and if we're getting $2 million, $3 million, we begin to become quite successful and build momentum on these types of programs. There is a capacity issue being able to implement. So I think the board should start thinking about, and staff should start thinking about, what's our policy framework as an organization, and in which particular grants is it okay or suitable to weave in those staff costs versus the district bearing those costs and staffing up ahead of time, which is important, so that you have the capacity when you get the funding. And that could be temporary, not to necessarily permanently grow staff. And so if we're thinking about that's a good source of match funds and that makes us competitive, maybe that is the way to do it on certain grants. And in other grants, it might be more acceptable to weave them in as temporary costs. But I do want to flag that, because as we track towards making an application for the December deadline for LCCMR, and then again, which will come up quickly, the next annual cycle for Lessard-Sams, we're going to be asking for gradually increasing dollar amounts, and for work that's even more capital focused, and that's more staff intensive, and this is staff intensive. for acquisitions and construction. So I think it's something that we need to think about. We don't have infinite resources across the organization to pull people into project implementation. This is a case where you can make a judgment call on what the program loses because we're lucky enough to have the skill sets in Eric and Jill that are readily adaptable and immediately applicable to the rough fish management. But it is something that we need to think about if you're going to continue to push us to bring in more outside money. You've got to be able to execute, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to go back and get more.
Thank you. Manager Olson?
That's a good point. Let me ask the board their feelings on this. If we have an opportunity for Lassard Sams to bring in a bucket of money, and our budget can't match it, and we need to match it, does this board feel okay for 1 year to say, well, our normal levy would be a 4.4% or 6% or whatever that percentage is, and this year we're going to 13% because 7% is going to be used to match the Lassard Sams one-time opportunity for a specific project? Is that something we would want to take advantage of?
Manager Miller?
No. Real simple answer. Because it's too easy. What we've got to do is we got priorities, or we got plan, we got priorities, and we got to make sure that all the resources are meshed to that. And I'm not sure they are yet. And we can't do a 13% increase, no matter how good justification you have. Maybe you have to allocate some of it to capital improvement for for whatever. But just on an operating basis, no. I don't think we can do that kind of a jump. We probably have to do a lot of internal moving of people around and assignments, et cetera. But I just don't see how we have the support for that kind of increases.
Anyone else want to weigh in? I don't,
James,
Mr. Whisker?
You were going to...
Well, I was going to say that, I don't know what numbers you were throwing out, really, for instance numbers. I have always been willing to levy more than we've voted to levy, so I think that it's really important to have the resources we need, which includes staff, to accomplish what we need to accomplish. And how we get there, I'm not sure, but I wouldn't rule that out. Manager Shackleton.
I'm kind of like mine in the sense that I'm reluctant to talk about numbers and percentages, in part because I don't feel like we have aligned our staff yet. Mm-hmm. And I would like, I'd be able to better respond and think about the question if I felt sure that I knew that what our staff were doing was going to perfectly mesh with what our plans and our programs and our goals.
So food for thought for further discussions. Manager Loftus.
I guess my opinion to your question would be, I don't have a problem being very honest with this grant.
Yep.
And the provider of it, saying this is the size of organization we are, and this is a great opportunity, we'd love to partner with you. These are our needs. We would need construction management through our engineers, which is a consulted and comes at X cost. We would need acquisition, probably through legal. We'd need assistance. That would be probably an outside cost. To just assume that it would be an internal cost isn't realistic, and that makes us a teeny bit less competitive because other organizations are bigger and can do all of that internally. You are who you are, right? And you might not be, if we're worried about how competitive we're going to be and what those internal versus external costs might be, I think you just have to say, we're going for this grant. This is what support we would need to implement this project, whether it's some of it could be handled internal or a lot of it would be external through consultants. It just is part of the project cost, in my opinion. And I don't know, you know a lot more about how that grant gets issued and how to be competitive, but I think you just have to be honest about what you can bite off and what the cost is going to be, and maybe they don't fund all of it, and then once they've given you a decision on the grant. I think it's hard to have those hypothetical discussions. Or maybe I'm off base on what your question was, but.
That's good thought.
Manager Becker?
These are good discussions, especially since we've got FY18 coming up, which will be impacted by this grant. But I've always looked at it as fixed costs and variable costs. And they don't want to pay for our fixed costs.
Right.
But they're more than willing to pay for the variable costs. And we've got to figure out how to describe our expenditures in those terms. And the other thing that comes to mind is it would be great if we could figure out how to establish a rolling fund or something like that, rotating fund, to pay for some of our costs associated with these grants. I don't know quite how to do that unless it's getting involved with a 501c3 or something like that.
You know,
Mr. Earl?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was just gonna say that it is a bit challenging to try to line up any of our levy choices or decisions based on the grant funds, because I know that this year, some of the LCCMR and also Sarge Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council grants, that those groups made recommendations and then sometimes the legislature changes them. So, you know, this isn't an exact science. So if we make a decision based on what we hear in July, but then everything changes next legislative session, then there's a lot of moving parts that aren't always linear. So I think it's kind of hard to line up our levy assumptions based on kind of the assumption of grant funds.
Manager Miller?
We used to contract out for the monitoring, and we hired Dr. Singh. Who's going to save us all kinds of money. And we bought boats and trucks, and then we got 6 people in the department now. You know, so these assurances that we're going to save money and it's going to be, it doesn't work unless we got a good long-term strategic plan on what we're going to spend our money on and how we're going to allocate these costs.
But we're doing more.
I'm not, you know, I'm not sure. We're doing better. We're doing a lot better. But we were doing an awful lot of projects.
I was thinking of research and monitoring, which is what you were just mentioning.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if we're doing that much more.
Well, the E-grade development certainly is a good direction. Manager Olson?
Except they were crappier or something? Is that the term you use?
Mr. Westgate, is you want to speak?
Well, just one final point. I was going to point out, I think Manager Becker sort of beat me to the punch. This isn't just a staffing question either. It's a cash flow question. Sure. These are reimbursable funds. You want to go after $1.2 million in funds, and we have, as we discussed for the capital projects, we're going to have a certain amount of direct levy. We're programming grants that are coming in, and then we're looking at capital financing and the projects that we're putting into debt, and how we refinance some of our existing obligations to provide some flexibility within that capital finance account. This is just one other variable in that mixture. And as we continue to go year after year in seeking outside funds, really it boils down for me, and this isn't probably the place for the discussion tonight, but since this is good context, I wanted to poke on it. We just need a little bit of a agreement between the board and staff on the appetite for implementation. If we're going to go after more and more grants, we will need to levy up for those reimbursements, and we will need the capacity to implement. So some of it boils down to a question of how much do you want to accomplish in how much time, you know, sort of the volume and pace of the work from where I sit. And that's hard to predict and define. But
Charlie.
Oh, sorry. Did you have your hand up again, Manager?
I had a quick question for Manager Becker. The Lassard Sam's grant money is always reimbursed spent after investment's been made?
Yes.
Okay.
There are provisions on acquisitions to facilitate them with same day as closing reimbursements
Quickly then.
with electronic deposits.
Okay.
And the DNR can do that. And we prefer to do it in lieu of the old way of cutting a check ahead of time and protecting it with your life until you get to closing.
Been there.
But for common ordinary expenses, there's no real history of advance funding.
Okay. How regularly would you submit for reimbursement? Is that something you do monthly, quarterly?
Weekly if you want.
Weekly if you want.
Whatever schedule.
So we wouldn't have to carry the 1.2 until we're done, kind of a thing.
Oh, no, not at all.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Good to know. Anything else? Thank you very much. Did you, switching the order of these to the closed session? We could do the closed session now, or we could do the administrator's report now.
There's also the president's report.
Okay, president's report.
Can you motion to?
8.1 and 8.2.
Okay, yeah. Should we do that first and 13.1, or should we do a closed session first? All right. Let's do the administrator's report first. I'll do my report first, actually. Let me just switch screens here. I have something I need. Okay. I'm going to leave the details for Mr. Erdahl to talk about, but in the last 2 weeks, I've been to the two first 50th anniversary celebrations, and I forgot to bring my example, but Jill Sweet devised a wanted poster for AIS, which is a coloring sheet that was out at the fishing day. And I took for a sample the one that showed the carp that had been colored, and its crime was hiding, and its hideout was Lake Calhoun. It was wonderful. If you've watched Facebook, though, you've seen a lot of those examples, so thanks to Jill for that.
What lake?
Calhoun.
What?
That's what the kids said.
No, I think that lake name might be changing, but today it's still Calhoun. Today it's still
I wasn't
Calhoun.
following you, yes,
The
absolutely.
Dame McCaskill.
Well, the child didn't know that. The child didn't know. Clearly.
I can't pronounce the new name anyway.
And also the May 4th policymaker event where Steve Wood spoke, and Mitchell Kukas gave a really nice tour of the stormwater facilities at St. Mary's. The 6 Mile Creek Halsted Bay Partnership meeting, and a coffee meeting with a member of the Orono Council. Then on to the Executive Committee. On April 27th, 2017, the Executive Committee held a meeting in closed session for the purpose of discussing the performance evaluation of District Administrator Lars Erdahl. The Executive Committee voted to recommend that Mr. Erdahl receive a salary increase of $115,300 effective February 9, 2017.
It's a big increase.
It's an increase too.
Increase 2, did I say?
Yeah,
Oh,
either way.
bad reading.
He accepts it.
I'm sorry? Double or nothing, eh?
I would like to move the recommendation of the executive committee.
Second.
Motion by Becker, second by Miller. Any discussion? Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you for accepting that, Mr. Erdahl. And then just a note that for your calendars, remember that we have the spring tour for the Board of Managers and the CAC on June 1st. And this is down here at 6 p.m. Do you think that time will hold?
Yeah, I think so. I believe that's what Tiffany is kind of planning towards.
Oh, great. And that will be in the middle and lower watershed areas since we did upper previous time. And that's all I have, Mr. Erdahl.
Yeah, and actually, we're also planning kind of a staff tour that will be the upper watershed, so if we can maybe see if it works for people's schedule too, that when we do some of that staff work too, we can maybe see. We kind of did that last year for the board members, so. I have just a few quick updates. As President White mentioned, the anniversary events are going along, and thank you for those of you that have been able to attend those. That makes a big difference. To be out there doing the storm drain stenciling and also hanging out at Lord Fletcher's with the crappie fishing contest. And I think we're looking at kind of how these work, and I know Jill was there at Lord Fletcher's and others that were at the stenciling opportunity to, we're kind of building over time. So the upcoming 2 events are on June 3rd at Carver Park out in Victoria. That's a bird watching focus. It's called Birds, Birds, Birds. And then another one on June 11th, which is titled Sunday Fun Day at Lake Nokomis. So we will have been in Edina, out on Lake Minnetonka, out in Victoria, and then in Minneapolis at Lake Nokomis. So again, we're trying to cover the entire watershed district with these events. So that's been kind of the primary focus. The HR plan update process, as I mentioned at the last meeting, I've met with Ann Anderson from Springstead, and she's putting together kind of a summary report and final report really for her work on this that will be due to us the end of May. I've not seen, I met with her last week and had some communication with her today actually. I think there's going to be a rough draft of that next week, and then my hope was to present that at the board at a board meeting in June. Unfortunately, I understand that she's out of town, not available on June 8th, so I think that might make it the June 22nd date. Hopefully that would work for her schedule. I kind of want to get this all done as soon as possible. So every time we have another 2 weeks or month delay, it's I know it's kind of difficult, but that's kind of the current thinking on where we're going with the HR plan development process. And as part of that, we'll kind of be somewhat of that initial discussion about the implementation plan and schedule and timeline for that too. So we'll try to incorporate that at the same time.
Could that be something that could be emailed out?
What would you like emailed?
Yeah, if you're expecting something from Springstead.
Yeah, well, definitely.
I was just looking at the calendar.
Definitely, yeah.
We talked about it.
Yep. Yep. Mr. Miller?
I didn't get a chance to review the minutes, so it's just a recollection that I asked to see the raw data, and it was decided that as I recall, it was decided that the only way that would be possible is with at the attorney's office, because it's not subject to disclosure and all that kind of stuff for privacy. I called the attorney, and he didn't remember anything about it, and I want to know what the status of that is. Does anybody else have a recollection of us asking to see the raw material?
My recollection is that Mr. Smith said that he would devise a process that allows us to see it without having an open meeting issue.
Right. That's why I thought, go and visit his office and see the material there.
We haven't seen that
No.
process. That's my recollection.
So I'd like to be able to do that. I'll to make sure it's in the minutes, I'll move. Okay.
Any discussion? Mr. Welch? I apologize. Mr. Holtman.
May I just ask I'm not sure what the motion is precisely.
Review the raw data that was collected by the consultant from the staff of the board and outside consultants, etc.
So are you asking that you would like Lewis to, you're waiting for something from Lewis on that process?
Yeah, he doesn't have it, and he doesn't remember. He was at the meeting, but he doesn't, I can imagine, he had a lot of other stuff on his mind and didn't remember the request, and so I renewed the request to pass the board.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess I don't off the top of my head recall the specifics. I think we did have some follow-up discussion about how the designated board liaisons would have access to some of the information, and then it was shared. A lot of the consultants I don't know how raw you want, because most of it is handwritten notes on pieces of paper, so that is being accumulated and summarized. So I don't have that, only the consultant has that now. So I don't know if you wanted to see I'm trying to figure out how in the work progress and timeline, when it would be possible to gather kind of that information.
I mean, I was presumed it was just what she submitted. Like, I was presumed it was what she submitted, not the handwritten notes that she was taking, but what.
There are actually there are two versions of it. There was the version that we saw in committee, or as a task force, and then there was the version that the attorney submitted for our meeting.
Okay, I haven't seen either one. I'd like to see the one that was submitted to the task force, you know, in the attorney's office for review and leave there.
So could your motion be to have the attorney?
It had a lot to do with anything that was related to somebody's job performance review, kind of thing that is not discussed in public.
Right.
So we couldn't put everything that was in that raw data assembly out in it's private data for that particular employee. So that's why for our meeting we had to have a different version.
And you did specifically bring up and ask
It still is
for-
private. It's still private data. We're just viewing it as
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
And you're entitled to do that.
Yeah, and not take it out or anything like
Right.
that, or copy it, or.
Right.
But we weren't certain of the specific process, so legal was going to develop that process.
That's what he was going to do, right?
So can your motion be to carry that forward?
Yeah.
Carry out that
Yeah.
request? Any other discussion?
Well, just for clarification, so you're not looking for her notes, you're looking for that first report?
The version that they saw first
Okay.
before was sanitized. You know, I
Well, made
don't wanna give you war stories about, our council has been here when we had staff uprisings from the audience and things, and, you know, on the HR issues. So, you know, this is pretty calm, you know, investigation of how the staff feels and what's being developed.
Sure. And I think that Mr. Smith might have thought that you were requesting kind of all the notes, handwritten notes, but when I talked to him earlier this week. So that point of clarification, that you're looking for that first one that was shared with me, that would be, I think, much.
The one that, the liaison stuff.
Yep.
So may I say that there's a motion to ask legal counsel to devise a process whereby we can see the raw data if we wish to, that two-page memo without violating open meeting law?
What two-page memo?
Well, the summary.
Is it only 2 pages?
Yes.
Well, I don't even wanna see it. I mean, what's second to it?
Well, a lot of information.
Is it really?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing.
Okay.
Those in favor?
I'll take the expert's word on it.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. And Mr. Erdahl, do you have anything else for us there?
Yes, we're working through the 2018 budget planning process. Staff is kind of in the process of putting some numbers together at a departmental level and then bringing those together. We're looking at kind of the strategic planning framework as kind of the guiding document to kind of help frame how we're putting that information together and where our priorities are. And at the joint committee on May 25th is when we hope to bring that back to you for presentation and discussion with a lot more detail to give kind of where we're standing there, and then go into kind of the work plan development process following that in the month of June. Any questions about the budget? Where we are, where we're going, and process things? Like President White mentioned, I joined, she had a request from an Orono City Council member to meet to discuss the Big Island Planning Committee, and I joined them for that meeting last Friday afternoon, just kind of getting an update on where they are on kind of some of their thinking. She had some different requests about trying to outline what our future plans or goals were based on our status as the conservation easement holder for the entire property. We kind of had that discussion saying that we didn't have our long-term plan was to maintain the ecological integrity of that property. So we weren't really kind of planning or programming it. That's kind of the property owner's prerogative. So we kind of went back and forth with when to have legal counsel for the city and the district involved, And I think President White and I thought the later the better, in terms of having them develop some kind of program activities or plans that we could respond to, rather than kind of be directly involved in trying to outline all the options on the table in terms of what could or could not be allowed in advance. So I think they had a meeting earlier this week on that, and they have kind of invited, have an open invitation to us to attend the next meeting, which I believe was the 6th of June, early
Sounds
June,
right, yeah.
something. And if there's any kind of additional information we can provide from a staff or board perspective. So we're continuing just to, that dialogue's been opened. I think the positive outcome is that they are kind of aware that they have to make sure that they work collaboratively with us to make any development opportunities or changes on the island happen.
Thank you, Manager Miller.
There was a long discussion at the CAC last night about it. Several people are intermittently involved in it, I guess. And there was talk about a 501c3 was being formed to take over the management of the yeah. And I don't know what the benefit to anybody that is. It doesn't relieve the city of anything, or nor us, I guess. I don't know what role they would have, but it sounds like there's a lot of different entries for confusion in this whole discussion. Because the discussion at the CAC last night was really interesting.
And one of our CAC members is serving on the planning committee with the Orono for the Big Island Planning Committee too. So he's kind of making sure that our perspectives are kind of shared there too, to some extent, on an unofficial basis. And then again, we've made the offer to kind of present things on a more official basis as needed.
How was the state represented on? There was direct state bonding money allocated to the acquisition in addition to our money and Orono's money. And there was a claim last night that the veterans have maintained some kind of access in perpetuity, forever on it. So there's a lot of different jurisdictions over that land. So maybe we should send the attorneys to all these meetings to make sure they understand that it's pretty complicated.
I think that really she was looking for a list. What are all the things we'd allow, all the things we wouldn't allow, and that's why she wanted their attorney and our attorney to talk. But it doesn't work that way. I mean, you can't give them a list. Manager Loftus.
I think the little bit I know is it was a committee that the Orono mayor selected. And I do believe there's some veterans on it, but there's, beyond that, there's, I suppose, the positive way to look at it is a focus on new ideas. However, I think they're lacking on inviting partners, so to speak, Three Rivers, the watershed. Renee Clark certainly knows a lot about that island. There's other people in the community who have an unbelievable wealth of knowledge who, I'm not sure why they're not tapping into that great gold mine of people who could offer a lot, but I suppose that's their choice. Even the staff person there, Mike Gaffron, who knows more about that island than anyone I know, isn't on that committee. So I think their focus, it seems to be, based on the way they've set it up, that they're focused on just generating ideas more than, I don't know, really getting a holistic approach at what is this island about, where have we been, why have we been there, what's realistic with our partners. So I don't know how she framed it to you, but to me, that's how it appears to be set up. Maybe they projected it differently to you.
I think that both President White and I thought it was kind of too early in the process to dedicate kind of an unlimited amount of billable hours to beyond staff to participate. But I think they're kind of early in that kind of brainstorming and fact finding and just trying to figure out what they can do. Or she talked about what really wanted to maintain the integrity of the island, and she mentioned Three Rivers Park District as a potential collaborator. But I think whether that's a potential collaborator or partner or funding source, or if it's a regional impact, or a local, or a city, and all those types of things are, I'm not exactly sure where the direction is going on some of those things.
And the committee's maybe only met one time so far?
I think this was their second meeting earlier this week.
So they haven't gone down that road too far. Manager Olson?
Just a reminder, we have 2 easements for that entire property.
2?
Yeah, one for the land that Orono has and one for the land that the Three Rivers has, because of the 2 projects.
Madam Chair, do we have easement stewardship plans for our easements?
I don't know the answer. Do we have overarching policy about that?
Yeah, we have maintenance
Yeah, we've got agreements.
plans and everything.
Well, you're asking a different question, I think. We have a conservation easement.
And with the conservation easement comes a stewardship plan,
Right.
which is designed to guarantee that the, correct me if I'm wrong, that the grantor of the easement performs as the easement requires. Does that sound right?
Well, the easement itself, typically, I think these 2 easements tended to state conditions that made the land off limits for certain actions by the grantor, and the management plans would be principally for how the district would affirmatively manage the land for the conservation values. And I know it's been, the preparation of management plans in general has become a structured part of the district's land conservation program.
I believe, however, in this case, the management plan is the city's plan, but that we signed off on it, the district signed off on it. I don't think we developed it per se, but I wasn't here when that happened.
I know our staff does make site visits on a periodic basis. I'm not sure how frequently that is. Do you know, Laura?
Once a year.
Once a year to kind of assess the property. And
Well, we put a lot of money into it, both for assisting the acquisition and the improvements over the course of 4 or 5 years. And it was a major project for us at the time.
Do you intend to take them up on their open invitation on June 6th? I mean, you might not want to send an attorney, but
yeah, I think that it would be good to have staff be available for that evening, and I think trying to figure out kind of the best mix of staff to answer questions and provide that. So.
And I did have my tablet with me. I looked at our website and showed her where she could read about the effort to do the
This bank stabilization project.
yes, exactly. Thank you. Which she said she'd look at. So, if there's nothing else, then we will go into closed session. Do I need to? We need to say why we're going to closed session.
Madam Chair, you need to state why you're going into closed session, and you need to identify the property that is the subject. And then once you are in closed session, you need to keep an audio recording segregated, and you again need to identify the property.
Thank you.
And
So,
sorry to interrupt, but I have a little bit of a lead-up presentation before we're actually entering closed
okay,
session as well.
all right. And then you have the legal description of the property or identification of the property for purposes of making
Yes.
an announcement.
I will.
All right, then we will not yet go into closed session. Proceed, Ms. Gray.
Thank you. So, third and final, I'm here to present the Halsted Bay Alum treatment opportunity in the city of Minnetrista along 6 Mile Marsh, and in particular discuss the potential cooperative agreement with Three Rivers Park District and seek guidance from the board on whether to continue to pursue this opportunity. So we're moving into sort of the third of our prongs here on the implementation strategy, and I unfortunately don't have stormwater management project in front of you. Oh, the circle's on the wrong thing. But we're talking today now about the opportunity to potentially develop an alum treatment station along 6 Mile Marsh to the benefit of Halsted Bay. And we reviewed this opportunity back on April 13th and sort of reacquainted ourselves with the feasibility work that was completed in 2013 around the development of this this treatment facility. So I won't spend too much time sort of reviewing that background. But as sort of a rough overview, recall that the area that we're speaking about here is between Mud Lake and Halstead Bay. Halstead Bay is a large reason that we're focused in the 6 Mouse-Sub watershed, and the fact that it needs a very large phosphorus load reduction. And about half of the phosphorus load in Halstead Bay comes from that upstream shallow lake system, particularly Mud and Parley Lakes. Thank you. And we found in sort of re-examining the property and the nutrient balance out here that while the phosphorus coming out of Mud Lake is largely particulate bound, this large marsh system causes, as water leaves mud, the wetland serves to transform that phosphorus load from particulate bound to dissolved phosphorus before it enters Halstead Bay, which can make the treatment of the phosphorus much more difficult. This just sort of illustrates the transformation process that occurs as it moves through that marsh system. So where a vast majority enters the marsh as that particulate bound phosphorus, as it leaves the marsh, it's largely dissolved there. So the 2013 feasibility study looked at 2 potential locations for this alum treatment system, but with that new information relating to the transformation process, it's become really clear that that western option, which would have the facility sited on the existing Dimmler property, which we currently own, you're going to get a much bigger treatment impact by siting it sort of at the end of the marsh, which is that eastern option, where you're really capturing the phosphorus at the end of the marsh system after the transformation process has occurred. Given that there's very limited opportunities for where one might site a facility like this, and we provided at the last meeting a pretty extensive analysis of these properties. But what it comes down to, and the subject property today is number 4 there at the end of Farm Hill Circle. This is really the only property that is both cost effective, has a known willing seller, allows us enough upland land area to actually site the facility, and allows us to preserve the contingency that if we couldn't connect to Met Council sewer, that we would be able to pump it over to our Dimmler property and land apply it for treatment. So that this property in question is the most cost effective and also helps us best manage all of those various contingencies. We were approached by Three Rivers Park District about this opportunity really about 45 to 60 days ago. They have now executed a purchase agreement for the subject property to complete this regional trail plan that is shown here. So over the next 15, 20, maybe beyond, they'll be piecing together land acquisitions in this area to complete this regional trail that will connect Carver Park Reserve all the way to Baker Park Reserve in the north there. So they identified essentially their involvement in the 6 Mile Halstead Basin Watershed Partnership. They knew that we had implementation interests out here, knew that they didn't necessarily need the whole parcel for their trail plan, but that the seller was only willing to sell the full parcel, and approached us to identify whether we'd be interested in doing some level of implementation out here. And so as you can see here, it's a largely wetland-dominated parcel. So we looked at the site and basically first asked whether we potentially could site the facility here, and we've had Wenk sort of taking that feasibility study and making it real a little bit, sort of putting some design behind it so we could understand whether the site could in fact accommodate both this facility and the trail corridor. So the layout will require approximately 2 acres of upland, so a majority of the upland on this property. I'll just sort of show the layout here a little bit. Essentially, you have an intake from 6 Mile Creek here. Gets pulled into a pump house, which sends it into a building where the chemicals are stored. From there, it gets fed through this building into an equalization tank, where the feed is split into 2 large clarifiers that are about 80 feet in diameter each. And then the water is discharged downstream.
How much of the stream continues to flow in spite of that intake?
Say that again.
Okay, you have an intake, but it's not dammed off. You're not getting all the water. You're just taking some of the water.
Yep, yep. The plant is designed to take in 15 CFS as a max, so it wouldn't take all of it, but it'd take a good portion.
Okay, thank you.
What's the flow there?
It depends on the season, but usually it can get up to 100 CFS, but then it can shrink down. Lower flows can be in the 10 to 12 CFS.
At 15 CFS, would it, I mean, it wouldn't capture the full flow.
No, what the plant would be designed is to get a good chunk of the flow, knowing that a lot of the lower flows is where you would get the phosphorus release that would be getting. But in the removal rates, that's something that we would consider, that we're not gonna get it all, but we'll get a good chunk of it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mann.
And another assumption that we've now developed is we likely could co-locate the sludge disposal in an existing easement that the city of Minnetrista holds. So there's a little more feasibility to make sure that that's the case, but if that is the case, with this acquisition, we would have really all the land rights that we would need to design and operate this facility.
One last question for the engineer. How do you, this whole area is notorious for culverts clogging up, things plugging up, lakes going high when they're not supposed to. How do you keep that intake functional?
We'll have a screening process that'll come out, that'll have probably have some sort of traveling scraping mechanism is probably what will come in.
So there'll be an active effort to, okay, thank you.
So at the board's direction at the April 13th meeting, we did continue to work with Three Rivers Park District to rough out an approximate cooperative agreement framework. So as I mentioned, Three Rivers Park District does have an executed purchase agreement for the property. Their purchase agreement is for about $300,000 per acres of upland and $15,000 per acres of wetland for a total acquisition cost of $750,000. Three Rivers is using the Met Council Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund, which is a fund available to establishing regional trail and park. And use of this fund for the acquisition permanently encumbers the land, which is one reason that we're here needing to sort of move this through quickly. Once they apply that to the land, we can't be brought to the table after the fact. And in the same vein, Three Rivers will proceed with the acquisition regardless of whether we come to the table. This just sort of shapes how much of the land they plan to acquire in the end. So the rough agreement framework is that Three Rivers will proceed to closing with the seller. I think they're planning on a mid-August close date. The district and Three Rivers will coordinate to develop a subdivision of the property based on the rough massing that you see here. We'll continue to kind of dial this in and figure out exactly where that line falls. The cost to the district will be consistent with those executed in their purchase agreement. So we'll be basically applying their formula to our acreage. And the property would transfer once we have paid, with the caveat being that they are willing to sort of finance it with us if that's what we choose to do. As we've talked about, there's a lot of pieces moving here still that would go into actually being able to complete the design and construction of this facility. We don't have up-to-date costs. The costs that we're looking at now are based on 2013 numbers. We need to identify and pursue sources of external funding. You know, at minimum, we're looking at sort of a $7 to $10 million investment in the facility, not including operating costs. So we'd be looking to really develop a creative and diverse funding stream to make that happen. And a big open question is the city's ability to sort of operate and maintain the facility. We did meet with the mayor and staff on Wednesday to sort of make sure that they're tracking, and we'll be in front of council, Minnetrista City Council on Monday to make sure that they're in support of the acquisition. But we're not asking them to, commit to anything at this point. There's just a lot of moving parts. So if for any reason the treatment plan does not get built, if we decide not to keep going with it, the contingency would be resale of the property on the private market. And we'll be working with staff, city staff over the next couple of weeks just to make sure that however we subdivide it, we're left with a buildable lot. And we also want to try to maintain dock access on that lot, as that'll be beneficial to our resale value.
Is that within the navigable zone?
It is. It kind of cuts off halfway through the property, but there is space where it's navigable. So as I said, we'll be presenting to City Council on Monday, and if advised by the board, we'd be bringing back a cooperative agreement on May 25th to this board, and then again, Three Rivers would be closing with the seller by mid-August. There isn't an obligation in the cooperative agreement right now as to when we sort of reach agreement on the subdivision, but once we have developed that cooperative agreement, we would move pretty quickly through that process. So I can answer questions about the cooperative agreement before we go into closed session. I'd probably reserve any questions related to cost until we move into closed session.
Thank you. Are there questions about the agreement? I see head shakes.
Choose the property address.
Yes, so the property address is 3910 and 3940 Farm Hill Circle, Minnetrista, Minnesota.
All right then. We will go into closed session for consideration of possible acquisition of 3910 and 3940 Farm Hill Circle in Minnetrista.
And, Madam Chair, can we just have a motion to that effect?
Closed session.
Motion